Hey, what's up? Welcome back to the Less Invasive Podcast, your source for minimally invasive surgery and robotics and other assistive technologies for the operating room and radiology environment. If you haven't done already, make sure to subscribe and rate the podcast 5 stars. I'm your host, Lucien Blondel, co-founder and CTO of Quantum Surgical, a startup commercializing the Ep12 robot for percutaneous tumor ablation. I bring to the table 20 years of experience in imaging and robotics in various specialties, orthopedics, neurosurgery, spine surgery, interventional radiology, and interventional oncology. Today, I'm super happy to have Anne Osdoit on the show. Anne is the CEO of a medtech startup called Moon Surgical. Moon is developing a robot for laparoscopy procedure called Maestro, and is also a VC partner at Sofinnova, a Paris-based VC firm, where she's in charge of a medtech acceleration fund. And we'll talk about Maestro and VC. She, prior to Moon, she also led a couple of medtech startups created and seed funded by MD Start, and she held roles in marketing and clinical affairs in the medtech space. So now I'm moving on to the AI and the data, because this is a really big topic today. I mean, every medical device manufacturers asked to talk about AI, and people do things differently. But I understand from your presentation at LSI, you were at a LSI event in Europe last year. You talk about how you integrate AI and analytics into the surgical robot, and you are gathering data from 3 different streams. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I think I would agree with what you were suggesting, right? Data is a buzzword. The question is, what do we do with it, right? And how do we turn it into features of our product that can deliver value and be acceptable to regulators, right? And that's really the conundrum. The first thing is obviously to collect data, and if possible, to collect proprietary data. Why not? The data we collect is really coming from 3 different bricks or sources. The first one is we're sensing the OR environment with using 3D depth cameras, basically, that are embedded on our system. I mentioned earlier the automation of the setup. I mean, that's part of the automation of the setup. It's understanding the surroundings of the system. And so there's a lot you can do when you understand what's going on in the room,
Yeah.
right? Not only automate the setup. So that's the first data stream. The second source of data is really the arms. So I also mentioned earlier that the arms themselves are sensors. So we constantly, document what we call the telemetry of the system, and we basically capture the positions, the forces, the movements of anything that is held by the arms. And so that's really important, because it really gives you an insight on not only how every surgeon performs surgery, but also almost their intentions, right? Because you understand the forces before even the instruments get moved. And so that's a really it's really a gold mine, essentially, and it's nobody else has that, right? I mean, it's a technology that is pretty much opposite to the traditional robotic arms, right, which are made for everything but being transparent, right? So that's the second source of data. And then the third one, sorry, is one that everybody has. It's the laparoscopy
The video feed.
video
Yeah.
feed, right, coming from the laparoscope. And so that gives you insights on basically what's going on inside the abdomen, right? The steps of the procedures, the surgical technique, the clinical decision making, etc. But the beauty is when you combine all these, there's a lot more you can do with the data than what has been done traditionally. And so before we started working on actual features coming out of this data, we started actually putting together the data backend infrastructure that would enable us to collect this data even in our cadaver labs, right? To make sure that even without knowing what we would do with that data, we were sure we had it somewhere in the right format and ready to be used in the future. And then after that, the question became, okay, what do we do with that, or where do we start, right? Because there's so much you can do with the data. There's the stuff you can do in the procedure. There's the stuff you can do outside of the procedure. There's the stuff you can do to help with efficiency. There's the stuff you can do to help with clinical decision making. It's infinite. And so we decided that we would start with a few features which have a lot of things to bring to our core value, right? Adaptability, accessibility, simplicity. And so, this example of the automated setup is I think a good one. It's, it's not necessarily, a feature that, it's not a feature that will deliver clinical value, right? For sure, right? But we believe it's a feature that delivers tremendous value, right? In terms of facilitating the usage of your system, probably removing 10 minutes of setting up your system is a key to, developing its adoption, right? So we started with features like that, and if you think about, one of our criterion for choosing the features we're going to implement based on data is the regulatory bar, for sure. We want to implement things that can actually become a product, and that are not going to result in an endless fight with the regulators. So it's another filter for us.
Okay, so just one last question, because I'm very excited about. I would like to see this technology, because on the field there are, Medtronic as the touch surgery with the video feed, the AI analysis. Intuitive as the same with the Intuitive Hub. Other companies are providing off-the-shelf systems for surgical video analysis and stuff like that. You are the only one, to my knowledge, to have this depth camera to analyze what's happening in the room and actually looking at providing it into a commercial product. There are research projects, obviously, but
it's interesting what you say. There are several companies that equip operating rooms with 3D cameras, right? But they put these cameras in the corner of the room, right? So it gives you a lot of insights on what's happening in the OR, and you can do a lot of things with that. You can prepare the next patient when you're getting close. You can detect errors. You can count the number of gauze, filled with blood, and make sure you can do a ton of things. But it's not directly
it's not connected to the robot.
with the exactly to the corrective action, if you will, or to the consecutive action, right? And I think the beauty with a robot is you can sort of make it closed loop.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I will come to Paris to see this robot for sure. All right, so we're moving on to. So I know a lot more about the Maestro robot and how it is intended to be used in a laparoscopic procedure for high volume specialty. Now moving on to the Moon Surgical story, learning about the company and the startup journey. So, what's the story behind Moon Surgical? When and how it started?
So Moon Surgical was not called Moon Surgical initially. I think you have a question on the name. It was founded by Professor Brice Gaillet, who is, a very, famous laparoscopy surgeon in Europe, and a co-founder, Pierre Cambredon. And Brice had really worked for 10 or 15 years with a robotics lab at Sorbonne University. So the lab is called ESIR. And he had been working on this concept of what they call the cobot, right? Co-manipulation robot. They had identified technology to develop that concept, and they had a demonstrator in the lab that was functional. And they were able to show me in January of 2020 a demo, right? I mean, I had known Brice for 10 or 15 years. I had worked with him on a project at Mauna Kea Technologies, and I had kept in touch with him. One of our NDStart portfolio companies called SafeHeal is in the field of digestive surgery as well. So I had, occasionally met Brice to discuss that. In January of 2020, he said, "Hey, I have this thing. It might be ready for a technology transfer. Do you want to come over?" They did have something at the lab at Isir, which was, nowhere close to, a clinical product, nowhere close to our robot today. It was essentially the arms, very different arms than they are today, fewer degrees of freedom, completely different operating system. They were running on Windows. I mean, things that, needed to be vastly changed. But they had something to show us, which was pretty faithful in terms of the surgeon experience, right? So I was intrigued. I think, I mean, it's fair to say that I did not fully understand the magnitude of the impact we could have with this thing at the time. I was like, yeah, it's cool. It's cool technology. It's different. Why not? And then I started looking, for people who could help me understand it better or position it better. And, I was, looking for experts, and I had a former team member from Mauna Kea Technologies who was one of the early employees at Oris outside of R&D. He was tasked with basically, doing the very initial positioning work for the Monarch system at Oris. And so I called him and said, "Hey, who would you recommend to basically assess this technology?" And he gave me names of people who had been instrumental in developing Da Vinci and other robots. And I brought them to the lab. And they tried the system, and they're like, yeah, there's something there, right? It's very different. Okay. And so we basically did our diligence, and it's interesting because we got very very definitive feedback from people. I will tell you one of the interesting piece of feedback we got, which was that in robotics, you have to pick a clinical indication and develop something that is entirely specialized around that and stick to it. I was like, really? Is that what you should do for this platform? I couldn't entirely see it. But anyway, we got, I think, sufficient feedback to be convinced that, there was something there without knowing exactly what we would do. And then, MDStart decided to basically invest in the project. There was a company created, but there was no money in the company. Okay. And there were also no team, right? There were no operators to develop it. So we invested in June of 2020, then started discussing the license and the transfer of the technology. I know you have some questions around that. We ultimately transferred the demonstrator on October 1st of 2020, so just over 2 years ago. That was the day my first employee joined. Okay. He was, a former colleague from Mauna Kea, and he's our head of software. And I'm glad he joined the same day, because I would have been totally clueless with that demonstrator. And then other people joined, in the following few months.
So I mean, that's impressive, because that's a very fast time to FDA clearance. I mean, if you started in October 2020.
Yeah, if you consider we redeveloped everything.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that's crazy. Is. So what were the main challenges that you identified you had to solve when you started as a CEO of this very early stage company, but yet with an aggressive timeline?
So one of my mandate was really to build an initial team that would accelerate the project, right? I mean, this is the MDStar DNA is, you identify these projects early, you invest basically the company creation or in the seed round, and you accelerate them while de-risking them. So I was looking for resources, but I was mostly trying to understand, how do you start a team in surgical robotics, right? I mean, I had never done that. So I spoke with a lot of people. Okay, who are the first resources, etc.? Where do you find them? And I realized that a lot of the knowledge and the skill set is in the US. I mean, that's where most of the companies are. And so I wanted to keep the company in France, and our arms supplier is in France, and a lot of things are in France. The lab, of course, the technology came from is in France. Our surgeon founder is in France. So there was no question about the fact that it would be a French company, and we would have a part of our team there. But I realized that recruiting a few people in the US could help.
Okay.
To say the least. So I started exploring that, and that was in the summer of 2020, so before we had transferred the technology. And I got a few names from a few of my contacts, and started essentially a very intense courtship with a few people in the US, where I would speak with them every week.
Okay.
We had a weekly meeting with several of them, and I would just pitch them the story. And I had nothing. I mean, I didn't have the demonstrator. I didn't have a team. I didn't have an office. I had nothing. I was just telling them, hey, this is what the technology is about, and this is what we could do with it. And it's extremely differentiated. It could address a very large market, and it's going to be great. Please join me.
Come to France.
And you have to realize, I was in France. It was during COVID. There was no vaccine. There was no way to travel.
Okay.
Right at the time we had these discussions.
We've forgotten about that.
Yeah, so it was of course a leap of faith for these people, right? So which is why I had to speak with them repeatedly, and they didn't know me, and everybody in this industry sort of knows each other. So I also had to try to come across as someone sort of credible, and so it took me a few months, and then Dave Noonan, our CTO, joined at the end of November, and Jeff Alvarez, our Chief Strategy Officer, joined in January of 2021. And then from that point, it was, I wouldn't say easy, but from that point, it started going very, very fast.
Okay.
It's from that point I started feeling like I was driving a Ferrari and trying not to put it into the wall.
Cool.
And it has been the case since then. I must say.
And so right now I understand that it's both a French American company. So how do you work with those two cultures? How do you what is it like to have this kind of company?
So we are a French American company. We have, a big part of the team here, and a big part of the team in the US. Small half here, large half in the US. For the first 6 months, so basically until July of 2021, we couldn't meet, right? We could never meet. So we just developed this company culture where you have to kind of do extra efforts on anything related to communication, right? So we speak a lot behind the screen. Of course, the time difference with California doesn't help. Right? 9 hours. So anyone who joins the company in the US has to be ready to work relatively early in the morning. Anyone who joins the company in France has to be ready to work rather late in the evenings, at least 1 day a week, right? We've kind of evolved and condensed these late meetings, but it's if it has to be this way, right? There's just no other way. And so we have basically company policy where let's say during 4 p.m. and 7-8 p.m. here, It's all dedicated to meetings. We have shortened meetings to 45 minutes so that we can have more meetings and have more discussions in that time frame. And we just had a lot of interactions, and I think we've benefited tremendously from being on both sides, right? Because the French team works during the day, then they go to bed, they wake up in the next morning. The US team has worked during the night shift.
It's like a
It's like
24
around
hours
the clock. It
company
never
working.
stops.
Yeah.
And you have new results in the morning, and you take it from there. And it's pretty amazing how efficient we have been. And then, of course, the borders reopened at some point, finally. And we've been able to see each other on a very regular basis. We do a lot of work here in Paris. We have our US colleagues coming over all the time. We go to the US a lot. Either individual team members, that's pretty constant, or the whole team. We had, for instance, a whole team event here in France this week. But we do those quite frequently. It's important.
Okay.
At least at our stage, to develop the company culture.
Sure. So you are talking about acceleration and the mention of the Ferrari. Is the partnership with NVIDIA part of this acceleration? There was a press release about the Moon Surgical being alongside other companies like Proximie and Active Surgical in a NVIDIA Inception program, and I guess the Maestro platform is using this NVIDIA AI platform. Can you talk a little bit about what does this partnership bring to an early stage company?
Yeah, so we always had this data component in mind, right, for our platform, and we knew it was not the immediate focus, because the immediate focus was developing the hardware and the software to control it, but we knew it would come next, and so. We started, thinking about, the data infrastructure and the data processing very early. I mean, as soon as we basically started working on the architecture of the system. And at that time, a year and a half ago, NVIDIA had already a very, I would say, pretty vocal strategy about growing into life sciences, right? Which has been, part of their messaging for a few years now. And if you look at the companies which presented this year at the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference earlier this month in San Francisco. NVIDIA is the second largest market cap company which presented at JP Morgan this year, right? I mean, it's very obvious that life sciences is an important piece of their growing business, right? So they had basically this program where they were enrolling a few companies to help define the specifications of a new GPU that would be designed for medical devices. And so, we of course had to, apply and, explain why it was important to us. And I guess we were, probably legit enough to make it into the program, and have since then had a great collaboration with them, really developing this thing. I mean, writing the specs, explaining our needs, explaining what we need in terms of, managing redundancies, managing emergency situations, managing a lot of things that are very specific to our industry. And they were listening and taking the feedback and integrating that into their, new product, which has been amazing. So for us, it was a bit of a bet because it was a product that was in development and that is in development at NVIDIA. And, in our first in-human system, we basically used surrogates, right, to kind of replicate what we will be getting from NVIDIA. But for the development of our commercial system, we were expecting that, that element coming from NVIDIA. And so it is the case now. We're, integrating their technology, and it's going to be a great enabler, basically, for all these future features that we will be adding to the system.
Fantastic. Yeah, great. I mean, that's the impact of AI in healthcare, and especially in surgical robotics. It's just growing, and I mean, it's amazing to see what.
Yeah, it's just the
Yeah, it's just the
beginning.
beginning.
Mm.
So everybody is like, I don't know how you say in English, like building the plane as you fly it. So
Hmm.
I hear this kind of
Exactly.
story with your partnership with Nvidia. So moving on to the last part, because I want to be mindful of your time, both CEO and VC, and that's the question. By the way, you are both you have those both role, which is I don't think not that much common in at least in the medtech startup environment. And what does your schedule look like when you have those two roles, and one of them is also for a French American company?
I would say busy.
Okay.
No surprise. But busy doesn't bother me. Busy is good. Um, it's very intertwined, right? I mean, I don't tell myself, "Hey, today I'm the CEO of Moon Surgical, and tomorrow I'll be a partner at Sofinnova Partners in charge of MD Start." No, it doesn't work this way, right? Because when you're the CEO of a company, it never stops, right? Especially a French American company, right? It never stops. Um, so um, so my schedule is different every day, right? I mean, I have all the usual things a CEO would have, which is, of course, one-on-one meetings with a number of people in the team, leadership meetings, team meetings, weekly meetings about a number of things. Of course, my job is to make sure no one in the company ever worries about money. So fundraising is
Yeah.
an integral part of my job and takes a big chunk of my time, managing our current investors, our board, thinking about the strategy, doing a lot of planning. All that is of course a kind of a daily activity. And then on the Sofinnova side, it's a bit the same thing, right? You receive deal flow and you work on your opportunities, pretty much as they show up,
Okay.
right? You can't tell someone, "Hey, wait, I'm not gonna listen to your pitch today because I have another job." Um, so I do my best, I guess. I have, I think it's predicated on having absolutely fantastic teams on both
Yeah.
sides, right? And people. I am not a micromanager. I trust people,
Trust and delegate.
and and they know I'm here if needed. Anytime. I'm very reactive and very available for people. But I also let them, do their work, and it's been okay so
Sounds
far.
great. So,
It's been great.
yeah, one last question. If you weren't a VC partner, if you weren't a medtech CEO, and money was not a concern, what would you do today?
That's a tricky one, but I sort of answered it already, Lucien. I said I wanted to be a physician, right,
Yeah,
as a kid.
I forgot about that.
So that would be one of my answers. I think I still think I would have loved to be a physician, because I'm just extremely interested and passionate about the way we deliver care, and it's just a fascinating occupation to me, if you will. And I'm also, from a personal standpoint, extremely grateful, because one of my children has been very sick over the past few years, and I spent a lot of time in hospitals, and just seeing what they work with, and you know how they can transform your life, has only made that feeling stronger. But I would also say that if money was not a concern, if I could do anything, if I had all the time in the world, I would be a writer. I love writing, and I like also being a little bit creative, and so I think I would enjoy that as well.
Cool. I think I would create a paragliding school if I was not a CTO, co-founder, and money was not an issue. But
That would be
yeah,
great.
that would be awesome.
Yeah.
I could.
Can you be a professional marathon runner?
Yeah, yeah. Who knows?
I might do that
Oh,
as well,
cool,
but
cool.
I would have to
Are
be
you running
younger.
Are you running a marathon this year?
Yes.
Which one?
Well, I don't know if I'm running it, but I'm registered for the Paris
Okay.
Marathon.
Is it in? It's in March,
It's in
April.
April.
Okay.
In
Cool.
April.
All right. Thank you so much, Anna, for being on the show, sharing your thought about laparoscopy, the Maestro robot, and sharing a bit of the story behind Moon Surgical. Hang on a minute. We'll chat offline. Thank you very much, Anne. Um,
Thanks,
so,
Lucien. Thanks,
yeah,
everyone.
thanks everyone for listening to the Less Invasive Podcast. This is a podcast covering minimally invasive surgery, robotics, other assistive technologies for the operating room and radiology environment. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and rate the podcast 5 stars. Thanks.